Everyone, welcome to Building Hormone Happy Meals and why it's important to regulate your blood sugar, reduce total body stress, and reduce inflammation with the foods we choose to eat. My name is Zoe Jet Blackley, and I can't wait to show you why I am so passionate about eating well. Now, first things first, I'll tell you a little bit more about who I am. My name's Zoe Lee, as you know. I'm a certified strength coach and nutritionist, and I have a passion for educating women on how to maximize their health and get great results from their training and nutrition. I've been a coach for 6 years now and have collected 15 certifications in training and nutrition, work with females ages 11 to 76, and I'm constantly perfecting and refining my crafts of holistic women's health, photo shoot prep, and improving general lifestyle and well-being. Now, when it comes to happy hormone meals, let's first discover and find out what the problem is, okay? And I want you to think as well if you know someone who suffers from this sort of a situation or personally you suffer from it yourself, okay? Now, in one sentence, combine overworked, overstimulated individuals with the fact that majority of today's affordable food has been manufactured to be hyper-palatable and built for convenience, and you have your answer for why society as a whole is becoming more sick, more fatigued, and more confused. Now, here are some signs that you might be someone who suffers from a little bit of blood sugar dysregulation and imbalanced hormones, and you're changing up your nutrition and optimizing your nutrition could improve these symptoms. So you might be someone who suffers from constant cravings, or you have very little meal satisfaction after eating, meaning that you might finish a meal and although your tummy might physiologically be full, you find yourself always wanting to search for more, always wanting to have one more bite, okay? You have a significant amount of caffeine throughout the day, and for that, I'm going to say it's going to be more than about 2 cups a day, more than about 2 shots of coffee a day, okay? Yet you feel exhausted all of the time. Okay, you might be someone who suffers from short bursts of productivity after eating, which is not really the suffering part, but then you find yourself with insatiable cravings not long after, and then that tends to drift your focus and make it more difficult for you to carry on in between meals when it comes to completing tasks. You might be someone who tends to get brain fog quite a lot. You might be someone who always wakes up at least once in the night, and that could be a few hours after falling asleep or 1 to 2 hours before your alarm. The reason that you might be someone who wakes up throughout the night is you might be suffering from something called blood sugar dysregulation, where after your last meal, your blood sugar tends to spike, your blood glucose levels tend to spike really nice and high, okay, giving that little buzz before bed, and then they come crashing back down. And in the event that they come crashing back down while you're sleeping and they go below your baseline level, it's going to send a signal to your body to wake up and search for food, okay, or to wake up and be wide awake, because you need to wait at least sort of a period of about 15 to 20 minutes before your liver can begin to convert fatty acids into glycogen, okay? And then you'll be allowed to technically go back to sleep. By that time, you're usually wired and awake, okay? So you might be someone who, after a few hours of sleeping, you wake up, you're either hungry or you find it really difficult to fall back asleep. This can be a big sign that the last meal that you're eating in the day is causing a little bit of a spike, which then has to come crashing down, and your body is unable to last the fasting period of 6 to 8 hours without waking up and needing something to sort of get it to that halfway mark and beyond. Okay, now you might be someone who finds yourself constantly picking throughout the day, and then your eyes are often bigger than your stomach. Okay, whether or not you're preparing your own food and you're making sure that it's big enough so you can try and be satiated between meals, or whether you order big items because you're worried you won't be satiated between meals. Also, you might be someone who often feels dizzy about 1 to 3 hours after not eating and find yourself needing a little bit of food to feel better. Okay, now, benefits of stabilizing your blood sugar over the course of the day. So the flip side of those symptoms, okay, this is when we optimize our nutrition for our best health. You'll find that you'll have more energy, you'll be more satisfied after meals, and you'll also be able to get through a busy day on 0 to 2 coffees. A lot of that will just be due to the fact that you're optimizing and metabolizing your meals a lot better over time. But then as well as that, it'll be due to the fact that you should be getting better sleep quality as well, okay? So a double whammy here. You can go 3 to 4 hours after a meal without crashing, and you tend to get a good night's rest or feel rested after sleeping when you have more than 6 hours sleep. You find you have less irritability, less anxiety, less low moods, and you don't feel the urge to peak throughout the day. You can make mindful choices when eating and tune in to when you feel full versus when you feel hungry, and you have balanced and sustained energy between meals. Okay, you can focus on completing tasks at hand for a long period of time, and this could be 60 to 120 minutes, and then you feel in control over the course of your day. So I want you to have a quick look at these symptoms. Let me know how much you feel. Can't let me know, sorry. Have a little bit of a write down in your journal of how many of these symptoms. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 9 symptoms here. Tick off how many you have. Okay, and then likewise, tick off how many of these you get to have if you have any of these at all. Okay, now if you're someone who finds you have a lot more of the symptoms that show signs of blood sugar dysregulation and hormonal imbalances, then the rest of this workshop, I really want you to pay attention. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to get into creating our own hormone happy ingredient selection. Okay, and this should be foods that equally you enjoy to eat and or cook, but also foods that sit well / don't upset your tummy. So it's really important that the foods that you do choose, okay, that they're foods that not only you enjoy eating and cooking, but also foods that actually sit well in your tummy. So if you're eating something and you're feeling bloated, you're eating something and you're feeling gassy, or like you need to go to the bathroom really quickly, that sort of a thing, that's obviously a sign that that food is having a little bit of an inflammatory response, okay, and a negative response in your gut. Now, this is an opportunity for you to temporarily remove that food so that you can remove the inflammation that gets caused every time you eat it, okay? And then actually give your gut a chance to heal so that you can then include it in smaller doses into your routine again over time. Okay, so it's really important here when you're creating your own hormone happy ingredient selection that you don't just hand it to a nutritionist and say, tell me what I can and can't eat, but you actually work with someone, okay, to pick particular foods that you actually enjoy. And this is really important because what one person enjoys versus what another person enjoys, if you're someone who follows more of a plant-based diet, versus someone who follows more of an animal-based diet, everything is going to differ and be specific to you. Okay, and what happens is when you don't take the personalized approach with this sort of a thing, you end up usually having more guinea pig / trial and error moments, but you also usually end up having a lot of plans and a lot of meals that you don't actually enjoy eating because you don't actually really like the food, or you don't actually enjoy prepping because you don't actually enjoy prepping that food. Okay, so it's really important. The lists that I've created in front of you now, these are my personal items. Okay, and so because I've been working on this over time, my lists, as you can see, are quite long. Okay, I have expanded my repertoire to fruits and veg and all of those sorts of foods that sit well on my tummy. And then I've also included at the end, which we'll touch on, which is fun stuff. And so I'm going to explain how that plays a role into everything as well. So if we go in the first column, you can see I picked a lot of protein items, okay? And these protein items, again, from top to bottom, are my most common ones that I tend to eat, mainly because of ease, okay, with preparation for myself personally. Ease of preparation, I also enjoy cooking them. They're quite easy, so the top sort of, all of them to be honest, are quite easy to season with basic seasonings, or I can get a little bit creative with them if I want, pick my own herbs and spices. But all of these foods are things that I actually prep, I actually purchase, and I actually eat. And this is again what is really important, because when I'm looking at my hormone happy ingredient selection, when I'm looking for inspiration throughout the week because I might get bored of my meals, it's important that I actually see items on the list that I actually enjoy and can actually get excited about cooking and eating, because this is what's going to guarantee the longevity of my results. Now, likewise, the next one that we move on to is carbs, veggies, and fiber. Now, the reason that I've included these is because you'll find that all veggies are carbohydrates, but not all carbohydrates are veggies, okay? But if you put them into the one column, or you can separate them if you like, this just helps to, when we're creating your own meals, this just helps you to section out and compartmentalize everything so that when you're looking at your lists, you can make a quick decision of what you need to include. Now, you notice with the carbs and the veggies, I've included my favorites, again, and what I personally eat most often. I've included those, and then I've also included, when it comes to the veggies, I've also included those that I like to eat most often, and given myself a lot of different options. Okay, likewise, the more time that I've spent refining my repertoire, the more that I have learned what foods tend to sit well on my gut and what foods don't tend to sit so well on my gut. And when foods aren't sitting well on my gut and I'm having an inflammatory response, I'm not going to feel my best, and extra energy from my physique and my body has to be used to deal with the issue at hand, instead of just being able to digest foods that sit really nicely on my tummy and keep me feeling my absolute best. Next over is fruits and fiber. And so this is where you'll tend to find that a lot of fruits have fiber. Not all fibers are fruits though. So with that, again, I've listed my favorites, and it's important to note that these ones are my personal favorites and what I have access to and what I eat most often. And so that is why I've chosen these ones in particular. Now with the carbs, veggies, and fruits and fiber as a whole, it's important to note that when it comes down to fiber and when it comes down to the way that our body breaks down fiber, okay, it's really important to note that no two people will be exactly the same. Okay, one person might feel comfortable having 15 to 20 grams of fiber a day, whereas another person might feel comfortable having 35 to 40 grams of fiber a day. Another person might feel comfortable having 0 to 5 grams of fiber a day. So it's really important that when it comes to listing your carbs/veggies/fruits, they all come under the fiber umbrella. And it's really important to note which ones set you off, okay, and which ones don't, so that you can, again, expand your repertoire, but then also work out how much fiber your body thrives on daily. It's important to note that when we're consuming fiber, fiber is technically food for our gut bacteria. Now, this is a great thing when we've got lots of healthy, thriving bacteria in our tummy. But what happens is that a lot of fibers that we tend to consume, if we have majority of our bacteria in our gut being more negative, then the fiber feeds that negative bacteria as well and can actually make symptoms worse. So it's really important when it comes to listing these items that we do put the relative ones under the fiber category, so that when you're making adjustments and making sure that you can check in with yourself to see how you feel, you can note what type of fiber it was. So you have insoluble and soluble fiber, and that means that one's water soluble and one's not water soluble in the body. Okay, and so it's really important to note that with the fiber in these products, depending on how you cook the foods as well, this can also influence how the fiber is broken down before our body actually takes it in. So I know this might be all a little bit confusing and overwhelming, but basically, to simplify it, your carbs, veggies, and fruits all tend to contain fiber. So it's just important to note that over the course of the day, you might have a particular amount of fiber as a whole that makes you feel really great. It could, again, be between 0 to 5 grams, could be between 15 to 20 grams, it could be between 35 to 40 grams. How much fiber you have is going to be personal to you and going to depend on the state as well of your current gut bacteria. Okay, when it comes to how we cook our fibers, remember that sometimes overcooking produce can actually make it easier to break down. Okay, likewise, more raw produce can actually make it harder for our bodies to break down and cause a little bit more of a negative response, such as bloating, gas, constipation, or diarrhea, if we have something that's more on the raw side opposed to the overcooked side. Okay, so that's just a little bit of an explanation there, but don't get too hyper-focused on it. Okay, the next one is fats. And so here, again, I list the fats that I most commonly have and I most commonly have access to. And this is where you'll see that there's actually a crossover with some of these items here, namely the salmon, the beef brisket, the ossobuco, the whole egg. And you'll see here we've got salmon, beef brisket, ossobuco, whole egg. Okay, so and sardines, oysters down here as well. So it's really important to note that when it comes to fats and protein, some proteins will have fat in them, some fats will have a little bit of protein in them, and so some of them will have a little bit of a crossover. And this is, again, where when it comes to building your own sort of plate and your own hormone-happy meal, it's important to note that if you can tick both protein and fats off in one go, okay, and in one item, you don't always necessarily need to add more. Okay, so this is where, again, when you list your items, okay, for proteins, carbs, fats, that sort of a thing, that if there's any cross-reference, if there's any crossover, that's okay. It's simply just for us to know so that when we're building your meals, we can make sure you're feeling your absolute best eating them. Next over is legumes. And so I don't consume a lot of legumes, but when I do, these are my legumes. And so with that, it's important to note as well that the way that I cook my legumes will definitely impact the way that my body breaks them down. Okay, if I try and have anything that's remotely raw when it comes to legumes, I do tend to have a little bit of a response in my tummy personally. Okay, and a lot of people may suffer from a similar sort of a thing just by means of breaking down the food. Now with this, I tend to find that these feel okay when they're cooked really well. And so again, when you're writing down your foods, if you're someone who is more animal-based and you don't consume a lot of legumes, that's okay. Okay, if you're someone who's more paleo-based and you don't consume a lot of legumes, that's okay. But if you're someone who's on the plant-based side, then you're going to know all about legumes. You're going to have so many legumes in your diet. And so it's really important to note that, again, when we're breaking this up, you might have crossovers between legumes and proteins. Okay, you might have crossovers between legumes and carbs. And this is, again, okay. We're simply just defining our repertoire, defining our ingredient selection, so that when it comes to creating our own meals and expanding the repertoire of what foods we enjoy and what foods sit well in our body and make us feel the best, is that we can have all of these in list form already. Okay, now the last one is fun stuff. And so fun stuff for me is dark chocolate, boba tea, sushi, rice pudding, avalanche hot chocolates, and if you know, you know, and then well naturally hot chocolate as well. Okay, and then of course gelato and sorbet. Now these are the fun stuff that I like to eat, and I include these in here because it's important as well that you have a fun stuff list. Okay, and that you identify over time as that fun stuff list changes, lean into it and let it change. Okay, because I'm going to show you on the next page what is sort of, I guess, the overly fun stuff. So these are things that I include into my diet, long story short, at about a 10% sort of ratio. And 90% of my diet is made up of sort of whole foods. Now, when it comes to enjoying this fun stuff, I just make note that most of this sits relatively well on my stomach, but I also note that the dosage makes the poison. Okay, and so with that, if I have an excessive amount of dark chocolate, my skin will tend to break out. If I have an excessive amount of sushi, my tummy will tend to start to feel a bit funny. Likewise with erythritol sweetened items like the avalanche hot chocolate and the well naturally hot chocolate. This is where, and the well naturally regular chocolate. This is where, again, if I have too much, I'm not going to feel good, but I can have a small amount and I tend to be fine. So again, listing your fun stuff, we still want to keep it as foods that you equally enjoy to eat and or cook and prepare, and foods that sit well / don't upset your tummy, even if it means that the dosage makes the poison and it's a small amount of dark chocolate, not a whole block. Now, after you write your happy hormone ingredients list, it's important to know your trigger foods. And I say this because you have to remember that when you don't acknowledge your shortcomings and you don't acknowledge the foods that trigger you, when they're around, you'll find it hard to control yourself, okay, for lack of a better term, and you'll find it harder to actually be mindful when it comes to consumption of these foods, regardless of how they make you feel while you're eating it or after. Okay, so it's really important that these foods, when around, they're going to be the ones that you currently find it really hard to eat mindfully or choose mindfully. And you find yourself that when you are craving them, it's an insatiable craving, okay? And you find yourself with an inability to stop once you start eating them. Now, before regulating my hormones with the help of my nutrition, alongside with many other stress reduction and self-recovery techniques, self-discovery as well, these were mine. Okay, so cake was a big one. And it was like, once I started, I just could not stop. It was the texture, the taste, it was the smell, it was everything in between. Okay, cakes, cookies, ice cream, rice, noodles, pasta, chips, and that could be fries or crisps, and then bread and baked goods. Now, one thing that I want you to notice is that for your trigger foods, I want you to write down how many of them are some of those that we spoke about at the start that are hyper palatable foods. Okay, so really, really, really tasty and manufactured to be really, really tasty. Okay, because this is where, when it comes to our convenience and when it comes to leaning towards protein bars and everything that is easy access and convenient on short notice, okay, this is where it sort of feeds into this urge of then wanting more of hyperpalatable items, okay? And the way that this sort of works, the way that our body works is when we eat something that's really, really, really yummy, okay, we get a bit of a dopamine response, okay? And dopamine is basically like our happy hormone or our reward hormone. And so what happens is when our dopamine hikes up, okay, because we have a really, really, really yummy food, it's got a good balance of mouth sensation, sugar, salt, fat, that sort of a thing, you're going to find that because it tastes so good, you're like, yum. And you get that dopamine rise. And then after eating that certain food, okay, you'll find that you then start to get the crash, crave more, want more, and find it really difficult to stop once you start. Okay, so it's important to note again your trigger foods because no doubt you will have a few of them. And it's important to know because mainly as your hormones and your blood sugar starts to regulate over time with healthier nutrition habits, you'll find that you can then enjoy these foods, but also assess how your mindset and how your brain changes when it's around these foods. So as I was on my healing journey, and as you will be on your healing journey, I would see these foods and be like, oh my God, yum. And then eventually it was like, I might just have a bite. And then eventually it was like, I actually don't feel like it. And then sometimes I'm like, oh, you know what would be really tasty? Can we go and get some cake tonight, a piece of cake? Can we go and get some ice cream tonight? But it's the difference between having a mindful approach around these trigger foods and having having an impulsive sort of mindset around these foods. Okay, it's important that the choices that we make when we are choosing to eat these hyper-palatable, extra yummy foods, that we can be mindful in our decision-making instead of gorging on them and then feeling that sort of regret and that shame that follows, which then just feeds into that cycle of it being bad and it being something naughty that we then, over time, because we restrict, we then binge and gorge on it again down the path. So, creating your own hormone happy plate. Now, basically from your list, okay, so if we go back here, we've got our list. And so what I want you to do is create your own hormone happy plate. You can do this by picking a protein, okay? That's step one, okay? And that should be 100 to 200 gram serving. And the reason that I've written serving sizes in grams, okay, or you could do serving sizes in ounces, that sort of a thing. The reason I've written serving sizes in grams is because it's really important that sometimes when we use volume measurements, we can overshoot the mark and we can go based off our eyes rather than based off sort of the actual data that's in front of us. So with that, I like to use grams when it comes to building my own hormone happy meal. It also helps me to make sure that I'm not over consuming or under consuming a particular item, but I can be pretty bang on with my results without needing to utilize something like MyFitnessPal. So this is where, when it comes to creating your own hormone happy plate, step one, pick the protein. Okay, we want to base our meal around this protein. This should be 100 to 200 grams serving, okay, unless it is something like a protein powder where it might just be one scoop, okay. Next is to pick 1 to 2 fibers. And so this is your fruit or veg, okay? So this is your fruit, veg, or carbs, okay? Add a little bit of color, and this should be between 100 to 400 grams in terms of serving size. Obviously, 400 grams being on the upper end if you are very hungry or you only eat sort of every maybe 4 or 5 hours, okay? Step 3. Now, if in step 2 you picked a fruity veg, if in step 2 you picked a fruit or veg or fruit and veg and you didn't pick a starchy carb or a carbohydrate, this is where in step 3 you can pick one carb, okay? And if you hadn't, I'm gonna have to cut that out. Okay. Now in step 3, if you didn't in step 2 pick a bit more of an energy dense carb, this is where you still want to include one of these in your meal. Okay, it's really important to remember that when it comes to building our hormone happy meal, we want to have a good amount of protein, carbs, and fats, not just protein and carbs and not just fats and protein, but we want to really try and balance out the three. Okay, and so with this, it's important that if you are picking really light fruit or veg, that you still include a little bit more of an energy dense carbohydrate option. Now, step 4 is pick a fat. And this should be between a 10 to 100 gram serving. And I am so sorry that has to be such a big range, but this could be something where if you're cooking in an oil, you might need only 10 grams. If you're having nut butter, you might need only 20 to 30. If you're having something like avocado, it might be closer to 100 grams. If you're having something like cheese, it might be closer to 40 grams. This is where, in terms of sort of one serving size of fat, there is a little bit of a range, but it's important. If you're having 100 grams of olive oil, you're probably going to feel pretty rubbish. So it's really important to, again, be mindful in this sort of a situation and err on the side of caution. You can always, after eating your meal, you can always go back and make something else little if you need to. But if you can check in and make mindful choices with your food, then you can really assess at the end of the meal if you need the additional sort of food. Okay, likewise, if you have a lot and you're sitting there and you can be mindful and say, you know what, I'm actually feeling quite full, I might put some of this away. Likewise, you can do that too. So try not to fixate too much on the numbers. They are there as a guide, but obviously with the range, it's going to be context dependent. Now, after that, you want to cook and assemble your meal to your preference, but I'm going to give you some bonus happy hormone tips. So if you're someone who eats their food in sections, and if you are someone who eats their food in sections, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Nothing can touch. Okay, instead of mixing everything, start with your fiber, protein, and fats first, and then finish on your carbs/fiber last. Okay, the reason being is that when we consume food, we want to visualize our stomach as a little bit of a basin, a sink. Okay, and so what happens is if we eat our carbohydrates, our dense carbohydrates first, and that goes into our tummy first, that's going to sort of go straight through our basin into the pipe down below. So straight into our stomach and then very quickly into our small intestine. Now, what happens is when we have these carbohydrates and they're not dressed with any sort of additional fiber, protein, or fat, what happens is that these carbohydrates cause our blood sugar to raise quite fast. Okay, raise quite fast and raise quite aggressively. And we've already spoken is that with that aggressive raise, we end up having quite an aggressive drop, which then can cause those cravings, that lethargy, brain fog, and fatigue. Okay, so it's really important that if you are someone who sections their food, that you then try and have your protein, veggies, and fats first, and then finish on your carbs last. If you're someone who mixes everything, it's not the end of the world, don't worry, because you still are technically dressing your carbohydrates, so you're still going to be able to get that added benefit of stabilized blood sugar. This is just if you are someone who's a little bit of a food person, and I am, so that's why I can relate to it. Now, when it comes to making a meal size, if you're someone who eats every 3 to 4 hours, okay, your total food volume per meal should comfortably sit between 1 to 3 fists of food. Okay, so when you think of the size of your stomach, the size of the average stomach can hold about 500 grams to a kilogram of volume. And so this is really important that when you look at your own stomach and you look at your meal, about 3/5, okay, as sort of a guideline of food total volume. This is where you want to be looking at how much food you're eating. And then after finishing that plate, assessing, how am I feeling? Am I feeling hungry? Am I feeling like I just want more food because it's there? And really assess and make that mindful choice of what you decide to do next. Then, if you're someone who tends to rush eating, try putting all screens away, sitting and being present with your food. Okay, remember to chew your food down to a paste and always finish the current bite before pursuing the next one, to really make sure that, again, you can be mindfully enjoying the food that you're eating and the food that is nourishing your body, but then also breaking it down properly in that first phase of digestion, which is chewing before it moves into the stomach, where the stomach acid starts to do its job. Now, I get it. So hopefully people saw this coming, but I get sort of the idea that I don't want to give up foods I enjoy, even though it upsets my tummy. And so the good thing is, and that I want to remind you, is that you don't. And so depending on whether or not you want to view your nutrition habits through the lens of the scarcity focused mindset or an abundance focused mindset is going to be up to you, because you really don't have to give up anything at all. And so this is where I apply the 90-10 rule. Now, a lot of people say 80-20, but I want to break down the math for you, okay? Now, 90% of your foods should provide nourishment, vitality, and connection. And I say this because a lot of the times people will say, well, I eat with my family, I eat with my friends, they cook me food, rah, rah, rah. It's important to know that your food choices and the food choices that you choose to make other people or you choose to eat from other people, they should provide that nourishment and vitality overall with the connection. Okay, no one is going to be upset at you if you sort of want to change the structure a little bit of how you conduct a meal. 10% of your meals can be there for taste, texture, and connection. So it can have very little nutritional value, but be there for the added element of, I got ice cream with my friend, or I was at a friend's birthday party and there was cake, that sort of a thing, a wedding. That is where all of that is totally fine. But what I want you to do is ask yourself, okay, if you are unable to live a happy life simply because you are minimizing the trigger foods you consume, what is the void in your life that is causing you to use food as a crutch instead of addressing it? Okay, you can have your cake and eat it too. And you can also have whatever cake you want, subject to allergies, in moderation without placing such an emotional weight on it. Now, more on the 90-10 rule. Let's get into the math. So let's break down that scarcity mindset a little and work on the maths. 10% of your year, which is 365 days, is about 37 days of the year. Okay, hypothetically, for 37 days of the year, you'll have 3 to 4 meals in those days. That's 111 to 148 meals throughout the year. Okay, so if 111 meals of the year you chose fun stuff for intentional reasons, like I really felt like it's my favorite food, I wanted to connect with a friend or a loved one over said food, I really enjoyed cooking, it really reminded me of my childhood, really helped me feel connected to my culture. These are all valid reasons to enjoy the damn food. But by no means does it mean that you're going to die if you choose to avoid a particular food, majority of the time, because it genuinely doesn't make you feel your best. Now, choosing more aligned nutrition isn't a habit that's going to be acquired overnight. So it's important to remember that when you first make choices aligned with happy hormones and stable blood sugar, it's very conscious decision making. It might feel hard at times and it might feel like you're missing out. But when you prioritize the 90-10 rule for 7 days, it will feel like a little bit of work has been put in. You might feel tired, and that's okay, because your body and mind are literally going against the grain of their usual. There's a high probability that you'll probably slip up a lot in this time, and it's totally okay. It's just your body adjusting. Now, next, when it's been a month, your blood sugar and your hormones will be in a better place than they have been 4 weeks ago. It'll feel a little bit more like a routine, and the emotions surrounding food may still be there, but your body and mind will be in a place to observe them and actually make intentional choices instead of acting on impulse and out of alignment. You will still have slip-ups, but they're becoming less frequent and you're becoming more present either in the moment or shortly after. Energy levels are at a high and you reduce the amount of coffee you're consuming, your sleep is feeling more rejuvenating, your skin is clearing up, and you're feeling more productive with your tasks. When it's been 3 months, your body's ability to self-regulate with your conscious help and effort is feeling more and more natural every day. The choices that you're making don't just feel right, but they feel good. And every time you slip up, the heightened emotions have now turned into conscious self-dialogue, and your patience and self-compassion has increased tenfold. All thanks to regulating your body's energy fluctuations by making aligned food choices. You're eating at regular intervals, you feel balanced energy and satiation between meals. When it's been a few too many hours and you are genuinely hungry, you don't build giant towers of food anymore. You make conscious and mindful decisions and feel amazing after most meals. You also won't get bloated anymore. And if you do, you'll know exactly what caused it and you'll be able to move past it with self-compassion and without hesitation. During this 3-month period, you've had almost 30 meals that were for intentional enjoyment, and you've had a few little extras here, which is your fun stuff, which have not caused a dent in your journey because 90% of the time you're using your growing repertoire of foods available to make you feel amazing instead. If you never try, you never know. So I want to know, what could you achieve if you just took a chance on yourself at a point in time where you had never followed through before? Okay, what foundations could you build if you took action from today? The best time to plant a tree was 25 years ago, but the second best time is now. So, closing notes. We are victims of information overload and confirmation bias with the rise of coaches spreading their word on social media platforms. Yes, this is great, but it can often become overwhelming, let alone confusing, and lead to analysis paralysis, the inability to make a decision or take action due to so much conflicting information. This is where a truly bespoke and personalized coaching approach can be one of the best investments you ever make into your health. And if you're wanting to know how to optimize your nutrition for better health, then you're more than welcome to follow me on Instagram at i.am.strength, or you can head to my website as well. Hope you enjoyed this workshop, and I look forward to seeing you next time.